Now, once again, good afternoon. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and welcome to week 2 of community development with me. Um, last week, Bu Fairly should have introduced the class or the unit syllabus to you all. This week, there are a couple of things that I'd like to discuss with you guys this week. So it's about social groups, social capital, and participation, or to be precise, public participation in planning. Within the social groups subsection, we'll talk about how social groups are formed and what is in fact a community. Then we'll move on to social capital and a discussion on societal changes, what makes or what drives societal changes or perubahan sosial. And then we'll have a look at participation, the levels of participation, what determines participation effectiveness, and what determines participation or participatory planning success, and then what are the setbacks in participation or public participation. Now, before we move on, maybe Bu Feli has already mentioned this last week, but I've enrolled I've listed the community development class to a guest lecture session on sustainable development goals. Mark your calendars. The session will be held on the 9th of June on the afternoon. So 3:30 in the afternoon until 5:30. There is no wiggle room or no negotiation whatsoever for the time slot, because the guest lecture series are always held in the afternoon. So it's either Wednesday or Friday, or was it Tuesday and Friday? But it's always around 3:30 in the afternoon until 5:30. So there's no negotiation there. But on the list of the spring session, or the GLS spring session, there's one topic that I thought is really, really relevant and should be really, really interesting for this class, and that's the integration of real estate for community development from the Sustainable Development Goals perspective. We're lucky enough to have several relevant guest lecture series topics in spring 2021. Hopefully next season, fall 2021, we would also have several more relevant topics. As with any other guest lectures, this will have a tie-in with the unit evaluation. So a summary of the lecture and a summary of the lecture and the discussion session, and I'll update the term of references that I made for the previous guest lecture that we had with Professor Nakamura, and maybe to tie it even more with the course that we're doing at the moment. Okay, so that's the lowdown on the guest lecture series thing. And now let's trudge on and start the discussion on social groups and how social groups are formed and what are the bases of a community. So a social group is basically a group of people who have a sense of belonging or a commonality, and they interact with each other. It could be common goals. It could be common traits or characteristics, and social groups are formed, or the formation of social groups are driven by one, a desire to blend in with other people, or there is an innate desire for us humans as social beings to interact with other humans, no matter where we are, no matter what the barriers are. We may have language barriers, for example, but that doesn't mean that the desire to be able to connect with other people diminishes. So a desire to blend or a desire to connect with other people is one driver. Another driver is a desire to be able to connect with the surrounding environment or to blend in with the surrounding environment. Um, if any of you have ever been abroad, either for a short visit or for a longer duration of stay, then I think the first couple of days, if you're visiting for a longer period of time, then maybe the first couple of days or the first couple of weeks you might feel detached from the general community and feel like a total stranger, so to say, and feel as if you're the odd one out, or the odd one in the group, or whatever it is. If you know, as a freshman in the first year of college or university, you might feel the same way too, and you might try to find ways to connect with your peers, with your classmates, and everything. So, in other words, you have this innate desire to connect with other people, and just to see which one of them in a group can click with you, and so on. And that way, you won't feel so much as a you won't feel so much as the odd one out of the group. Um, there are actually, if you come to think of it, there are actually conditions or terms, um, or there are actually requirements for the formation of a social group or social groups. First of all, each member must be aware that they are part of the group. If you're part of a class, like you guys are in the same class, each and every one of you are, I'm sure, are aware that you are part of this class. You are part of this batch of students, and in a greater sense, hopefully, you should feel that you are part of the academic society or the academic community in the department and in the university as a whole. And generally, within a social group, there is a reciprocal relationship between each and every one of the members. So it's not like you're talking to a wall or something where where it's a unidirectional type of communication, but there's also an interaction there. There's feedback. You give your opinion, you get feedback and everything, so that there's a reciprocal relationship between members, and that's just from the communication side. There might be other things. People might be asking you for favors, and you'd be doing favors for them, and vice versa. The third requirement for the formation of the social group is that there are shared values among group members. A shared value, shared belief, or a common, a shared value, shared belief, or commonality, or there's a shared goal. For example, in this class of yours at the moment, you may share the same goal, which is to graduate on time or graduate ahead of time. Maybe some of you might want to graduate earlier than others, while some others might want to just take it easy and be grateful that they're graduating on time, 4 years, for example. So, but that's a shared value. That's a shared goal between each and every one of you and your whole and your class, or with your batch as a whole. And lastly, there's usually a structured set of rules, or there's usually a common behavioral pattern. And this is this last component, or this last requirement is a bit more difficult to see, but it will be felt over time. No, you can't talk that way in this group, for example. If it, well, I'm sure everyone here is a part of a social media group, whatever it is. For example, a Facebook group into photography, for example, and usually that group would have a set of rules. You can't talk about this, you can't post about this, you can't discuss this and that, and so on. So that's component number 4. I would say, if that's the closest example I can give you of requirement number 4. So that's requirements for the formation of social groups out of the way. Look, if any of you would like to comment, or would have any questions whatsoever, please just you can unmute yourself directly, or you can just type in the chat box if that's more convenient to you. Right. Requirements. Now, here are a couple of types or categories of social groups. Social groups can be based on territoriality or territory. A community from a public housing, for example, they all happen to live in the same public housing facility or establishment. A tribe, a nation, citizens of a city are also fall into this territorial social group. Residents of a village, and the closest thing to every one of us, I suppose, would be the Rukun Tetangga, the RT group. Those are samples of territorial social groups. A group of people who happen to share maybe not the same values, but who happen to share the same space. We happen to share the same administrative borders, for example. And then there are common interest groups. Our class, for example, we have a common interest. Your interest is to graduate from this class, to pass this class with good grades. Good grades could be our common interest. My interest is to pass you all with good grades. Although that also depends on how you all how each and every one of you perform in class. So, a group of classmates would be an example of common interest social groups. They're usually non-permanent. It could be a long-term common interest group. For example, your class, you're basically stuck together for the next 3.5 to 5 years, for example. But after that time has passed, then you may disband and go your own ways. So it's not a permanent thing. Some of you may decide to keep in touch with each other. Others may be just be on their way and not look back. I know that's a sad reality of things, but and then there's another common interest group, but with a permanent institution or a permanent relationship or a permanent organization, family. No matter what the situation is, a family is family. I reckon, and it's a lot more permanent than a common interest group. Um, play group, play group as in not the early childhood education kind of play group, but it's more. I don't know why I put play group there, but it's it's more of it's more of the hobby thing that I mentioned earlier when I said when I gave you the example of a social media group into photography or into motor vehicles and such. So it's more of that sort of social group. There's another example, labor union, Persatuan Buruh, or they have a more set and structured set of rules, and they are more permanent. They're a permanent institution, although the members may come and go. So that's all on social groups so far. Any comments or questions that you need? Anything that you might need to clarify? Nothing yet so far. That's fine. So what's the difference between a social group and a community? In its barest form, a social group or a community is basically a group of is the same thing. It's basically a group of people. Although there are different they have different traits, or they have different features. As I mentioned earlier, in a social group, there's only that there's only a sense of connection between one member and the other, between one element and another. Once you connect, that's it. You're part of the social group. But if you want to become part of the community, then the first thing or the first feature to look out for is a sense of belonging. A sense of belonging within the community and acknowledgement from other members of the group, of the community. Do you feel like you belong there? You may be part of the social group, but you may not feel as though you truly belong there. For example, if I'll take one from personal experience. For example, during my extended stay in Australia, I was part of a community group. Part of a social group. My family and I, we were part of a social group, which is the suburban social group that we lived in. So we were part of it. We were part of a territorial social group. We signed up for newsletters. We signed up for newsletters or for any notifications on what's going on in and around the neighborhood. So we were part of the neighborhood social group. However, there may be a sense of detachment up to a certain degree, because in some cases we do feel there's a reduced sense of belonging, maybe in part due to our cultural background, as in we're not from there, and we were only there for 4 or 5 years, so the degree of sense of belonging is not as strong as someone who was born there and would take part or would know the history of the community and so on. So the sense of belonging was kind of there, or sometimes it was there, and other times it wasn't. So we were part of the social group, but we weren't we were not entirely part of the community because of that first feature, sense of belonging. although we were acknowledged from other members of the society, other members of the community. Um, we helped out some things, they help out other things, and so on. And that sense of belonging brings me to the second feature, which is a community is usually formed over a longer period of time and is continuous. And that community is expected to persist, to continue to persist, to continue to exist as time goes on. And we were only there in that suburb for a limited period of time where the general members of the community there were they were either born there or they've migrated there when they were younger, and now they had children there, they have grandchildren there, and so they've been there for a long time. They know each and every one. They know each other by name and everything. So it's a long period of time. One thing is for certain that in any social group, whether it's a community or a general social group, the membership, the participation within a group is generally voluntary in nature. So nobody's pushing you to do these things. You do it because it's because you may think that it's the right thing to do. You do it because you try to connect with people. You want to build the sense of belonging, and so on. And point number 4, multifunctional in nature. Well, within any social group or within any community, we have people with different professional backgrounds. We have people with different educational backgrounds, people with different cultural backgrounds, and whatnot. So each member plays to their strengths and weaknesses, and therefore there are some roles that they can fill, and that they can fill perfectly, and then there are other roles where they would be terrible at because of their predisposition. So multifunctional is as in each member plays to their strengths and weaknesses, and they complement one another. A community is generally more complex, more dynamic, and it has a much larger scale compared to a regular social group. Lastly, a community is often influenced by geographic boundaries. As I mentioned, we were part of a suburban community. The suburb was called Taringa. Anything that happens around in and around Taringa, we would know about it because everybody just lets each other know. But that's, again, it was influenced by geographical boundaries, much like the tribe, nation, city, village, and rukun tetangga thing. The territoriality plays a significant role in determining this community and sense of community thing. Now, other people have discussed or explained that communities generally have clear boundaries, both physical and administrative. There's a locality to it that ties in with the geographical component that I mentioned previously, geographic boundaries. And a community generally has the same thoughts or goals. They have the same interest. I reckon that's the same as that sense of, it's similar to the sense of belonging. If you don't have a common goal within your group, everyone wants to achieve A, and you want to do B, then there's a bit of a, there's not a bit, but there's definitely a disconnect there. And lastly, having a sense of place, group, or idea. There's a spirit of community, there's a communal approach. So basically, it's doing things together, doing things together. This is our place that we share together. This is that we take care of together, and so on. And there are, and then there are other forms of communities that are not geographically bound. Nowadays, I think communities are not just defined by geography or location. There are several virtual communities or organizations that exist purely for the betterment of the society. The schizophrenia community, for example, or the Save a Child community, the Komunitas Peduli Anak. And then, of course, we have this organization, Kita Bisa. They're a non-profit that would gather donations for many different purposes. So there are different forms of communities, and I guess if you look back at the sense of belonging and everything, I guess you can grow your sense of belonging. You can grow a sense of belonging in whatever community or whatever form of social group that you decide to participate in. Whether it's for charity, for public health, or for the safety and well-being of others, and so on. So, all in all, being part of a community seems like a good idea. Seems like a good thing, doesn't it? 1 second. If you look at it this way, there's a sense of belonging. You can contribute to other people's well-being and happiness, and just generally being nice to other people. But then there are other communities that has a certain stigma or negative stigma attached to them. For example, certain automotive communities, or certain sports fans, certain types, not all sports fans, and definitely not all car or motorcycle communities are like this. However, if you add some other keywords to whatever it is that they do, like the M word, I would say, then the negative stigma would just get worse. So that's one thing. And then, of course, sports fans generally get a bad rap, get a bad reputation from the society as a whole, due to their history of negativity, and so on. Well, yeah, let's leave it at that. So there are some good communities, and then there are some negative ones. Although maybe the intention of these two groups, the intentions were not bad. However, perhaps it's the execution of that intention. It's the execution of that passion. Sports fans, or car or motorcycle groups, they're just expressing their love, their passion for something. However, perhaps the negativity comes from the way they express these things. I was a part of a social group or a community myself while I was abroad, and on one hand, our group tries to promote a healthier lifestyle, but on the other hand, other parts of society as a view us negatively. Same as with the previous example. Why? Well, maybe because we don't exactly travel at a low speed, and we do tend to travel in large groups of anywhere between 20 to 30 riders, and yeah, on one hand, we're promoting a healthier lifestyle. Come ride with us, but on the other hand, pedestrians, namely pedestrians, hate us because sometimes we go on the sidewalk and all that. Now, community. So from social group to community, and now from community to society. A community is a group of people who have relatively uniform characteristics or uniform traits, uniform features. Its characteristics are more specific than a community criteria, and a society is a group of communities. So a community is part of a society. And within a society, of course, since it's a much larger group, therefore it has a much higher level of diversity within each of its members, or even it has some. A society would comprise of several subgroups or several communities, and these communities would be made up of different social groups and so on. And if you put it all together, from social groups to communities to societies, if you put them all together, if you're able to harness all the potential, all the positive energy from this large group of people, then you would have something that is called social capital. So next we'll talk a little bit about what social capital is, and then there are some perspectives on social capital. Now, social capital, in a layman's term, in my terms, would be a collective potential of a collective potential from different social groups or different communities and different societies. If you put all that positive energy or potential forward, then that's what social capital is. That's in my definition, my very simple definition. If you're looking for a more formal definition, then social capital is a set of informally formed norms to encourage the cooperation of two or more individuals, or, as I mentioned, resources born from a collection of social ties or from a collection of several different individuals and groups. You and I, this class, I'm sure we have some sort of social capital. We just never exactly explored what that social capital of ours is, because I have a mind, you guys have a mind, and therefore those are resources. I'm sure those are potential resources that we could use for something. Another thing about social capital is that it's, as I mentioned, because we have thoughts, we have ideas, and ideas are generally intangible until we put it to paper or we put it to practice. So social capital is actually something that can be felt and in a way measured. A little bit more on that later. Something that can be felt and in a way measured as a result of social interactions. And that's where the levels of participation will come in a little later on. There are several benefits of having this so-called resource, which is to improve community interaction and communication. So, for example, For example, if I have a certain, for example, I have a certain research interest, and then I discover that one or two of you have a similar interest, or yeah, a similar interest, a similar passion, then then I would of course interact with you more, communicate with you more, or perhaps we have another kind of commonality, we have another kind of similarity. Then we would of course interact more than others would. Another benefit of social capital is that it helps maintain harmony and values within a community. So and that ties in with the third benefit, which is to build solidarity. When you realize that you're building on that you're building or you're standing on each other's shoulders, that you're reliant on other people up to a certain degree or a certain extent, then you realize that then you do realize that you need to stay in sync or in harmony with the group of people, and that would make the group more solid, and in a way that solidarity helps generate credibility. And I put reducing costs as one of its benefits. I guess the easiest way to say the easiest way to say that social capital benefits in reducing costs is that there is something known in Australia as mates rates, or harga teman in Indonesian. So in a way, this this thing called social capital, this thing called social connection and social ties, in a way would help reduce costs up to a certain degree. Of course, there's no such thing as a free lunch. And when you have this solidarity, when you have this stability and credibility, then social capital would help bolster and improve or increase the safety of the community's environment as a whole. There are four perspectives or four views towards social capital. If you look at social capital or from a communitarian lens, then there are or a communitarian lens or a network lens, institutional view or synergic view, you notice that there are different actors within different actors influencing the level of social capital there. And then each of these perspectives and each of these actors have very different policy prescriptions, or policy prescriptions may sounds a bit heavy. Have different approaches or different methods in manifesting this their social capital. Sorry. For example, if you look at social capital from a community perspective or a community from a community lens, then social capital comes from community groups or voluntary organizations, and generally these community groups, these voluntary organizations, they tend to keep their organization small. It's easier to control that way. It's easier to manage that way, and then they recognize each and every. It's easier to identify each and everyone's assets or different strengths, and they would tend to, or they would help the less fortunate members of that community group. So small, and it's more of an internal. It's more for the group's internal benefits, so to say. So they help each other, but it's just kept within the members of the group. And then we have network view, where they bond and they bridge community ties. They have a set of different actors there, and entrepreneurs, business groups, and then information brokers. So in contrast to the community groups, when you talk about entrepreneurs and business groups, then they network with each other, of course, for their mutual benefit. And what that happens is they can actually potentially bridge social divides, and create a much greater impact on the community as a whole. And then from an institutional perspective, we have political and legal institutions. They have a much more rigid framework, and this generally involves a much greater group of people, the private and public sectors. And what they generally do is they would of course grant civil and political liberties. They institute transparency, and they try to exercise some degree of accountability in their efforts to make decisions, or to in their efforts to what was that word? It's on the tip of my tongue. Throughout the decision-making process, so to say. Synergic views are comprised of community groups, civil society, and firms, and states or nations. And then they're basically involved in co-production, complementary participation, linkages, and they enhance capacity and scale of local organizations. So these perspectives are more abstract. If you want to read up more on it, there are a couple of articles in the references list towards the end of this presentation, and I realize I haven't put them up yet at the moment in the classroom. I'll make them available once the class after this class ends. 2 seconds. Now, let's shift our discussion to societal changes, or moreover, the definition components and the theories of change. Societal change is an inevitable and dynamic process that occur in any society. They could be the changes could be structural, depending on the structure of the population. The changes can involve different processes or different mechanisms, like social movements. There may be societal changes due to conflict, or societal changes due to development practices itself. And generally, there is a direction of change, wherein there are impacts and consequences. Now, these directions of change aren't necessarily for the better. Some societal changes, especially societal changes due to conflict, they can actually lead to something worse. Thus, the impact and consequences. For example, if there's a conflict, whether it be war or civil war, ethnic conflicts and everything, that just brings societal change for the worse. how do we know that society is changing? Well, there are two things that we can look out for. We can have a look at the components of the society itself, or we can look for indications as in the number of protests that are happening, conflicts, and changes as a result of these four things here. So changes within a society can happen within community elite groups. It can happen due to the shift in cultural orientation and control systems. Um, Societal changes can be caused by uh, different human resource levels and distribution. Um, it could be because of the need to restructure resources and other group activities. Now, this is something that we see. This is something that we've seen quite a bit lately. Have a look at Hong Kong and Myanmar. Um, there's a lot of conflict due to changes in position and aspirations in Hong Kong and Myanmar. And then this, you, due to these changes, you can see the strength of the members in the new generation. Um, it's one way to it's one way of measuring how strong a group of people is. If you want to see how strong a group of people or how influential a group of people can be, have a look at protests, um, and see and you can sort of gauge it from there. And protests, conflicts, and changes can be the result of a changes in social morphology and demographic processes, and it could be the result of interaction or friction between existing systems. Um, I'll give you an example of a simple societal change. So, um, up until up until around 30 odd years ago, um, up until 30 odd years ago, tobacco consumption in Australia was a normal thing, was a regular thing. Um, before the Tobacco Advertising Prohibition Act in '92, I remember my teachers would go to the teachers' lounge and they would all be lighting up cigarettes. Um, and then the Tobacco Advertising Prohibition Act was introduced in '92, and then in '93 they restricted even more tobacco advertising, and then they have stricter regulations for the marketing and distribution of tobacco or other smoking products in '98. Even stricter packaging rules in 2011, and then in 2016 they introduced outdoor pedestrian smoking ban. Um, and throughout the span of 30 years, um, smoking shifted, or people's views of society's views of smoking shifted from something that was normally done. A lot of my teachers smoked, um, into now something that is looked down upon. If you're smoking, if you're smoking, you're either a degenerate or something else entirely. So this is just a small example of how society can change, and the regulatory framework and the legal frameworks that enforce that change for the better. With the nowadays we have something called designated outdoor smoking areas, which if you put that if you put if you put that together, the designated outdoor smoking area is called a dosa, or in our language is a sin. But that's a bit ironic. That's a bit ironic in their side. It is now so heavily heavily regulated and heavily monitored that the that overall, I think tobacco consumption has gone down significantly, and throughout the last decade or so, alcohol consumption is facing the same or is in a similar trajectory. More and more people are ditching that sort of behavior. It used to be normal for people to walk around with alcoholic beverage bottles in their hands, but nowadays it's not something that is socially acceptable anymore. If you really want to have a drink, then you go to a pub to have a drink, much like smoking. So, what was I talking about? Societal change, wasn't it? Right, societal change. Yeah, laugh all you want, love. Societal change is part and parcel of community development, and community development generally focuses on one unit, namely the community, um, and societal change occurs when the society consciously try to make irreversible structural changes, such as this. I'm sure that this has been happening. This has been happening for 3 decades now, and I think that the duration and the amount of effort that they've put in to make that minor societal change is it becomes an irreversible change. And societal change usually happens using voluntary professional workers. That's not always the case, but most of the time it does. But when it comes to enacting laws, regulations, then it's no longer voluntary, but it's more professional. It could be initiated by an external group, although that's rather frowned upon, because think of it, if we are a community group or a social group, and then somebody, a third party or an external group comes in and says, you guys shouldn't do things this way, that's generally frowned upon. But sometimes societal change can be initiated by an external group. Again, societal change also emphasizes public participation. It requires the awareness and the willingness of each and every one of its members, and most of the time it is aimed at community independence, and it reflects the freedom to participate in decision making, and the approach taken is general. I think I might have gotten my notes mixed up. This is some parts of this is about participation. All right, I'll revise this. I'll have to revise this. Yeah, this isn't supposed to be here. You know what? Let's move on to participation. Now, in this next section, I'll talk about the different levels of participation, the determinants of its effectiveness and success, and then there are some setbacks in participation. But before we talk about participation, we need to know what stakeholders are. Stakeholders in participation, or stakeholders in development, stakeholders in planning, and whatnot. Stakeholders, what stakeholders? Stakeholders are basically the parties or the people or the groups of people who have an interest in something. They don't have to have a common interest. They may not even have a common interest at all, but they have an interest in something, and the different things that these group of people are interested in can actually lead to something great. For example, this is a diagram of maybe product development. Within product development, we have employees and employers, then there are suppliers, there are investors, there are lobbyists. There are lobbyists who who push to make regulatory changes or policies for the interest of the stakeholders, for the stakeholders' interests. Then governmental and non-governmental organizations, and then there are business partners, and then there are customers, and all of these stakeholders are involved in the construction, the business management, quality management, manufacture, research, marketing, and purchase of public goods or of certain goods. So it's stakeholders. The term stakeholder is a term that is generally thrown about within our field of within our discipline, and yeah, I just wanted to get it out of the way, and to say that, well, so that we're on the same page. Stakeholders are just a group of people or groups of people who have a certain interest in something. Now that we got that out of the way, participation. You're participating in this class right now, which means that you are a stakeholder in this class. You are a stakeholder in this unit. And, well, passively speaking, stakeholders are parties who take part in the development process or in the education process, both here economically and socially. Actively speaking, then stakeholders actually participate in the process of this, in this process. At the moment, you are passive stakeholders. I'm here blabbering, and you're there listening. If we were to turn this around into, then you can be active stakeholders in this class and actually participate and actively participate in the discussions and whatnot. So, and stakeholders change subject-object relationship from the interaction of intervening parties. That's basically what, in a nutshell, if you want a more simpler term, then participation simply means taking part in something. There. Now, participation is something that we can actually measure up to a certain extent. Some of you may already be familiar with Arnstein's ladder of participation. There she laid out 8 different steps that describe the different levels of community engagement or community participation. It starts with what is called manipulation, and then up to therapy. Number 2 is therapy, then it's informing, consultation, placation, partnership, delegated power, and the highest level of community participation, or the highest level of participation, is citizen control, which basically means passive to active participation. when you're here, when you're in the first two rungs of this ladder, manipulation and therapy, it's generally categorized as non-participation. You're just there to receive whatever it is that is coming to you. Um, in the in the development and planning context, it just means that we become uh, the objects of planning. For example, um, building for the people, not building with the people, that sort of thing. And um, if we go slightly higher, the third, fourth, and fifth rungs of the ladder, informing, consultation, and placation, that is categorized as degrees of tokenism. In other words, steps number 3, 4, and 5 has a degree of involvement in it, although not entirely actively participating, but there's a degree of involvement from the community within it. Um, the public or the general population or civil society, members of the civil society may come to government officials and inform them of what's going on. They may um, they may forward their ideas and suggestions as to how things should ideally be. Now, in the highest three rungs, it's called the degrees of citizen power. Um, in partnership and delegated power, I think partnership is pretty self-explanatory. Um, Means that we work together with in planning. We work together with authorities to achieve a common goal, to achieve developmental goals. In delegated power, it's not just us informing the government, or providing the government with data and everything, but it's more. Our involvement would be deeper, and we have a certain degree of control, or a certain level of power to direct the changes or the development or the plans that they would be making. In citizen control, it's not exactly we take full control of development but it's more that we are on the same level as the authorities that are managing, or that are administering their plans, or their developmental plans, and so on. So, just to recap, the Einstein's ladder of participation, or the idea of this ladder of participation, um, ranges from passive participation all the way to fully active participation. Now, I have to remind you that Einstein's ladder of participation is not the only instrument to measure public participation or any other forms of participation in development or in any other activities. There are several others. However, Einstein's ladder is the most commonly used in social sciences. Or hang on, I should be more careful when saying that. Einstein's ladder is arguably the most commonly used method of measuring method of measurement. There you go. It's better that way. Um, When we talk about participation in development, then the community is generally considered as an active subject of development. The, the authorities take into account community knowledge, like job distribution within scientists and with job distribution within different disciplines, sorry, not within scientists, job distribution with different disciplines and local wisdom. So community knowledge is taken into account. And participation is generally long-term or mid to long-term, involves mid to long-term development. Participation is also a reflection of autonomy. It is autonomous. They can. The cool thing about participation in development is that we can tackle any structural kind of related issues, whether it be macro level issues influencing the micro level developments or vice versa. It is often spontaneous, although not that often. And when you talk about participation, community participation or public participation, then of course there's a certain geographical component attached to it. Therefore, public participation generally involves local action or local response to issues. This is the situation with our planning practice and development practice right now. Not 100% like this, but most of the times it's like this. We have public consultation periods where we try to involve, or where we try to get the community involved, at least as a degree of tokenism, maybe up to partnership and delegated power. We try to get the community involved try to get the community involved in development, in planning, through public consultation periods. Although it was not always so. A long time ago, we had status quo participation, or we had the illusion of participation. Now, back then, I think mainly during the New Order era, the community was positioned as a consumer who passively accepts development. So we're just watching as everything goes by. We're just we're just audiences of development, so to say. Now, if you decide to approach participation as if you decide to approach participation this way, then sadly the community potential does not become a reference for development agendas and strategies. The community potential isn't even realized. It's a more authoritarian approach to development. It's a more totalitarian approach to development. And that kind of approach, the status quo approach, gives absolute power to authorities, and it opens opportunities or opens chances for abuse of power. So, if possible, whenever possible, avoid such forms of participation. Participation is important, especially in this day and age, because we have had a change, especially in Indonesia. We have had a change in the development paradigm. We no longer build for the people, but we prefer to build together with the people. Again, if you take if you take kampung improvement programs, for example, we don't build, or the government, the authorities do not build for the people, but they walk together hand in hand and they build together. And the positive side of things, if you look at it that way, the positive side is that it builds a sense of belonging, and there's a sense of pride as well within the community. They can say that, this was our idea, and we made it happen. There's a sense of pride, a sense of belonging, and this change in paradigm has been set in stone, or well, set on paper. Actually, it has been institutionalized legally through regulations in regional government. So Undang-Undang number 22, 1999 on regional government. And we do realize that it's a part of the effort to fulfill community rights, including the right to seek, obtain, and distribute information. I think nowadays, if you're looking for developmental or development related information, it's a lot easier than it was even 10 years ago. There's a lot more transparency. Within our planning bodies right now. It's not ideal yet, but the idea of not building for the people but building together with the people is there already. So we are making steps and strides towards the right direction. Now, we can't really have everybody involved in every step of the way, or so to say, because for participation to be effective, we need to take into account not just the city structure, but the administrative boundary structure, namely the size, the form of government, or form of governance, and then there, of course, the legal requirements to enact or to involve people in development. The larger the administrative area, larger cities, they're more likely to structure participation opportunity. In the form of government, then usually city managers will emphasize, they will direct, and then councils or representatives will then support the participation. And of course, the legal framework may need to be adjusted in a way to foster the incorporation of citizen input. We have those regulations in place at the moment. Another determinant of participation effectiveness would be the participants themselves. How they were invited, how they were selected, and what are the reasons for their invitation or selection. Of course, ideally would be the reason people invite the reason people get invited to participate in a development effort is for citizens to do civic duty. But sometimes the participants are there because of some level of dissatisfaction. They want to bring about positive change, of course. The mechanisms of participation itself. Are there any opportunities for Are there opportunities for the participants to to express their ideas, to express their concerns, and how these mechanisms and how these opportunities are timed, and of course the scope or the coverage. Is it is it something that is it something that concerns the whole city, or does it or is it something that concerns only a small group of people, that sort of thing. The process, what is the purpose of participation, how and then how the when I say format here, I say the presentation of materials in layman's terms, such as tables, graphs, and comparisons. Um, often when we talk to the public or to the general public, um, we do get carried away and start talking and start throwing technical terms or bureaucratic terms at the general public. They don't know. They don't know these words. They have no idea what these complex words that we use actually mean and what it means for them. Uh, so the format of presentation should be suited to the audience, of course. Um, that way, participants are comfortable. That way, and they can then sincerely reveal their preferences. They can sincerely reveal their ideas and thoughts and everything. And of course, lastly, how effective is participation is determined by the desired outcomes. If the outcome is something that is abstract and immeasurable, then it would be really difficult to see whether the participation or the development that took place is effective. So one way to several ways to do it. Some ways to do it is that we use the information that we have for stated purposes. Make sure that there's a two-way communication. There's constant feedback on the utilization of information, and that we make sure that participants are satisfied at the perceived impact of development. Now, just hang on a couple more slides. Setbacks. Unfortunately, yes, there are setbacks to public participation, especially when it involves the civil society and the government and private parties, private sector, or generally when there are multiple stakeholders, there could be a lack of mutual trust. I don't trust you, you don't trust me, I don't trust them, they don't trust you, and so on. So there may be a degree of a degree of mutual trust is good, but there might be some lack of mutual trust. And then, of course, if there are differences within stakeholders' interests, a difference of interests itself is okay up to a certain degree. However, if the differences are too great, I want to go that way, you want to go, and you want to go this way, then that's it. There is very little chance for participation, or there's very little chance for participation success. Differences in bargaining power. If you remember the ladder, if one of the stakeholders is on the lower side of the ladder, then there's a difference in bargaining power. You need to bring these two powers up, and so that they can see each other eye to eye and negotiate Yes, obviously, setback number 4 is the differences in perceptions of participation. Some people might, some stakeholders might think, okay, your involvement is only up to this point, where other stakeholders might think, oh, hang on a minute, no, I don't want to be involved up to a certain point. I want to be involved further, or maybe no, that's too much. I don't want to be involved that deeply. So there might be differences in perceptions. However, this sort of difference could be settled by uh, by by conducting a preparatory focus group discussion or such. Lack of transparency, then the inability to organize participation. Um, that could be due to many things. Point number 6. And the last is the lack of political will. Oh yeah, this program sounds good, participation sounds good on paper, but I don't want to do it. Maybe there may be some stakeholders or some influential parties that hold that sort of perspective or hold that sort of view. Now, the only way for participation to succeed is if both sides are on the same terms. On the government side, the decisions are made in accordance with their level of authority. They don't take things further. They don't abuse their power in a way. Then there's an understanding of equal participation between superiors and subordinates. Point number 2 is a bit difficult because our corporate culture is generally superior, superior, subordinate, subordinate. But in order for participation to succeed in any context, whether it's development or in an organizational context, then there needs to be equal footing or equal participation between all levels of the organization or within the hierarchy of the organization. And then, of course, capacity, both financial and technical. From the civil society side, for the general public side, for participation to succeed, you need people or groups of people who are concerned about the policies or the decisions that will be taken. Of course, the availability of funding sources from the civil society side. Usually, if you talk about partnerships and participation, then the financial and technical burden is borne not just by the government side or the civil society side, but they usually share resources up to a certain extent, either by sharing funding or sharing in-kind contribution, as in technical expertise and such. The civil society, of course, needs to realize or have an understanding of governance and bureaucracy up to a degree, because if they don't understand how governance and bureaucracy works, then it could just lead to frustration on their side, because they might not anticipate the amount of red tape that they have to go through to succeed in or to participate in certain developmental programs. Number 4 is tied in with number 2, the availability of expertise in organizing the participation. It could be expertise, it could be just the need for funding, and then the availability of skills in policy analysis, negotiation, bridging, and everything. I guess point number 5 on the civil society side could actually be point number 4 in the government side as well, because if we talk about negotiation, bridging, and everything and such, It's not just from the civil society side who should be able to bridge and negotiate, but also um, relevant authorities need to be able to negotiate and bridge. Lastly, these are the references used to put together this presentation. I have these in my library, and I will post these. I will post these in our classroom for you all to read. If you want to get to know the ladder of citizen participation even further, or you might want to explore or want to know which papers or which publications have cited Einstein and developed their own sort of tool to measure citizen participation and such. But that is all from me for the time being. On our next meeting, we'll discuss the techniques for analyzing and understanding society. We'll try to conduct a simple stakeholder analysis and perhaps a little bit of social mapping and group dynamics and network analysis. So, in a nutshell, ways or tools to measure and understand the mechanisms of society. So, with that, does anybody have any comments or questions regarding what I have just delivered?
Hello, sir.
Hello.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Yeah. Thanks. The presentation was insightful, and I just want to know or find out, has there been a situation where, or maybe you've experienced before, where you try to involve the citizens or to participate in the planning process, but they don't want to take part, and how can you deal with that situation? And the second question is just out of curiosity. Earlier, you explained about the social and community groups. What about the NGOs and maybe the orphanages? In which category do they belong? Do they belong to social or community or what? Thank you.
All right, you're more than welcome. I'll get right to it. NGOs, orphanages, and such, I would say, is a part of the civil society group. Although the civil society group may be fragmented into different categories or different social groups, and but in my opinion, non-governmental organizations, non-profits, such as orphanages and social groups or communities such as the charity, as the For Charity group that I showed earlier, they're all part of the general civil society. As for the first question, has there been a case where citizens don't want to take part? I'm sure there have been numerous cases like that. How would they approach? How should we approach such situation? All I can suggest is continuous advocacy. A continuous advocacy and to continuous advocacy so that people are more aware of what is going on. How are we going to go about doing things and such. In my experience, I have not had that sort of. I haven't had that sort of. I haven't faced that sort of situation. Um, one one development related situation I was involved in was the Housing and Settlement Act, or Housing and Settlement Regulation, or to be precise, the formulation of the Housing and Settlement Act in Sumeneb, Madura. Um, we had an FGD. Uh, we had we had several FGD sessions there, and they would rotate us. So I think on the first day, I was sitting with the real estate group, and then other members of the urban planning lab were sitting with the government representatives. Others were from the sitting with the civil society representatives, so from Kepala Desa and others, village leaders, village elders, and others. I had the I had the luxury of sitting with the real estate developers, or the private sector side. Now, in that situation, nobody did not want. I think, sorry, confused. Everybody wanted to take part in the discussion, namely because I think they were frustrated with each other. Um, they were frustrated with the situation and such. As soon as the FGD started rolling, everybody just forwarded their ideas. Oh, we should do this, we should do that, and then because we had the FGD in a hall, and there were no segregation between one group and another. We didn't have breakout rooms, so everybody kind of heard what the other party was saying, and that made it worse. So the real estate group were saying, "Oh, we should make this regulation like so and so, so and so," and then the government side heard it and said, "No, no, 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 you can't do that." And so um, instead of discussing within the group, we ended up having everybody enthusiastically discussing with each other. It almost turned into a brawl, actually, but luckily it didn't. That was day one, a very eventful day one. But we gathered quite a lot of information, and then on the second and third days, we found a more common ground to start them off with. So taking the information that we received on day one, or the negativity or the positivity, and then we sort of started from there. All right, this is our common ground. This is what everybody can agree on, and now let's build on that. And so for the second and third day, FGDs were a lot more productive, and everybody was in the end everybody was happy. Although when we drafted the regulation, or throughout the process of drafting the regulation, we also continually communicated with not only the government. We were commissioned by the Sumeneb local authorities, but we continue to communicate with representatives from the civil society and the private sector, as well as the government, with whom we had already communicated, or with whom we had already had these focus group discussions. So it was a continuous process, and so. And so I think public participation, or participation in any level of development, or is a very good thing, because to be honest, throughout the whole process, we didn't really have to think much. We were more facilitators of change rather than become the drivers of change itself. From what I gathered from that experience is that society, civil government, and the private sector, they have the potential for change. They have the potential for change. They are the drivers of change. We were just there as the third wheel, and kind of like spun it around and facilitated that change. It wasn't. The end result. In the end result, you can't make everybody happy, and there were when the regulation was once the regulation was set and legalized, I think there were still some one or two, I would say, outliers who were displeased because of the contents of the regulation, or some parts of the regulation. They weren't really pleased with it. But all in all, I think that was okay. So yeah, I haven't had the luxury of experiencing any cases where the stakeholders didn't want to be involved in the discussion. But if someday any one of you ever come across such groups where they were very protective of their values, or they were reluctant to take part in discussions, the only way to do it is advocacy. It's through advocacy, continuous advocacy, and you have to we'd have to try and educate the general public, and basically tell them that everything's all right, everything's under control, and there's no need for you to be afraid. I think there's a marketing term where it says a marketing term or a marketing slogan jargon that says, sometimes the customer doesn't know what they want. You have to show them what they want. So advocacy is more or less like that. I hope that answers your question, and thank you for giving me the chance to share my pleasant experience.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Anybody else have any thoughts? Or maybe some of you have had similar experiences with participation within your community. I don't know, organizing the Independence Day celebration within your neighborhoods, if you have such traditions. That can be daunting and tedious, and it can be a bit frustrating. But that's a form of advocacy and participation as well. You share a common goal when you come to think of it. The goal is to celebrate the independence and everything. So maybe, or other things. When you were in high school, perhaps anything in relation to participation and community. Or Just out of curiosity, how many of you are a member, a part of, whether you're active members or not? But how many of you, with the show of hands, with the raise hand feature, how many of you are part um, of a social group or a community of some sorts? It could be hobby based. It could be anything. Anyone? I know. I can I. No, none of you. Nobody's involved in a, I don't know whether Instagram has groups, Facebook has groups. Nobody's a part of any of a virtual group, whatever, or an actual club. Anyone? One. Awesome. Two. Okay. Amira, what are you into, or what group are you part of?
I am currently part of a youth community, a non-profit organization.
Okay. And what sort of non-profit organization is that?
It is called Young on Top, and I was part of the organization in Surabaya. Usually, we like focuses on education, entrepreneurship, and environmental, something like that.
Awesome. Awesome. You're still active in this, or you're still a part of this organization now, are you?
Yes, I am still active.
Perfect. Thank you for sharing. I see Hata is part of a social group or community. What are you part of?
It's similar to what Amira said. It's a youth-run organization called ISEC, and we basically focus on cultural exchanges with people from outside of Indonesia. So we provide opportunities for people outside of Indonesia to come into Indonesia and do internships and volunteers in many fields, basically. And we also provide a place for Indonesians that want to go outside. And we basically provide the opportunities for people that want to go outside of Indonesia for an internship or volunteering programs, that kind of stuff.
Awesome. Awesome. And I think that helps increase society's exposure to the outside world, especially the youth, and opening and helping broadening their minds and such. Awesome. That's good. Thank you for sharing. I saw Peter's hand was up as well.
Yeah, I'm part of IISF, which is ITS International Student Family. It's for the all international students here at ITS, and it happens that I'm the president. So we are trying so hard to bring all the international students together because, you know, we are very far from our homes, and we also try to make sure that we give back to the community as international students here in Surabaya. We have a lot of programs actually. So it's one way of gaining some experience to engage with the community here in Indonesia. And I can't wait to see wonders.
Okay. Wow. Awesome. Thank you for sharing. Yes. Um, I know exactly how it feels to be far away from home, especially in these trying times where travel is greatly limited. I'm sure Hatta and his organization also realizes that travel is severely limited. And even the Australian border is closed until they say until April, but there's a small note underneath April saying yeah, until further notice kind of thing. So If you have any plans to migrate there, don't do it now, because they won't even process your application, that sort of thing. So excellent. Thank you for sharing, you guys. And actually, we are all part of a social group at the moment. Obviously, the class, but obviously we are also part of the department, and we are part of the greater university community, Civitas Academica, ITS. So yeah, and we all try to do our part, I suppose. Participation isn't always diving in head first, but I think participation is also everybody doing their parts, everybody doing the best they can in whatever capacity they have. Okay, so if there are no further comments or questions, then I think we can conclude our session for this week. I look forward to seeing you guys again next week in techniques or efforts or tools for understanding society. And other than that, I think, what day is it tomorrow? Wednesday. So I think we're going to meet again tomorrow for site planning. So until then, have yourselves a wonderful afternoon, and thank you very much for attending this week's session. Thank you very much again. Thank you again. Have a great afternoon. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.